Hi, everyone, and welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Okay, today I'm super thrilled. I know I always say this, but it's so true. It's genuine. I'm so excited because we're going to be looking at the challenges and experiences of mixed race kids. As a child of immigrant parents myself, and now as a parent of two biracial kids, I and my partner, we are constantly exploring how to better support our kids as they navigate this multifaceted journey with their identities. So today we are joined by Dr. Jennifer Noble, or as many of us know her from her socials, Dr. Jenn. She is an incredible advocate for the mixed race community who brings both her personal and professional experiences working with mixed race kids, biracial kids, all the kids that have more than one race attached to them, but also working with their families. And I think that's where the magic happens, is the environment with our families. Dr. Jenn has discovered the mixed race community in college, which I'm really excited to talk to her about because I don't think leading up to that time, she was quite aware of what was happening for her as well. So I'm really curious about how that went for her. But ever since this aha moment or realization, connection to this community, she's been deeply involved in advocacy, research, and then that direct support for parents like me who want to be strong allies for our kids. So, Dr. Jenn, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have you share your experiences. Eager to hear, all the insights, like mostly what it means to be an advocate for our kids, what parents, community members, and anyone in between can do to help. The focus is always raising kids that are strong, kids that are confident within their identities. That's our goal. So excited to have you here to guide some of my own curiosities. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thank you.
All right. So I'm just going to start with part of the introduction. I'm super curious. So you mentioned that discovering a mixed race community in college was like a huge, revelation, realization for you, aha moment. Can you tell us what that moment was like for you when you realized, oh, there's other people out here that are from different races? And then what inspired you to get involved so deeply after that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the moment I guess it was just a shock of like, I think it's more like I'm not the only one going through a particular experience, or if I've spent a lot of time thinking about my experience, finding that a bunch of other people do, such to the point that they're like doing research studies about it. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Like I'm not alone here. I think that was the moment. And then why I got involved so deeply, I think the more I learned about it, the more I just wanted to be connected to it because it just was a facet of who I was. It almost was a way to support me navigating the other aspects of my identity. The more that I could like kind of be validated in a mixed race community, it validated the process of like just connecting to all the other aspects of me. So it just was like a third part that I thought was really important, that over the years is, as I shift the way that I advocate and the type of work that I do, it might go up or down, but I really can't seem to just like, okay, I'm done with that now.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we're evolving constantly. And I
Yeah.
would imagine from that moment onward, you've learned so many things and maybe even conquer things in a different way than you did before. So what was childhood like? Can we like work backwards from that moment? So what was, a mixed race kid growing up like for you?
For me, I mean, everybody is unique. So my experience, I always try to tell people I grew up in Southern California where there is a lot of diversity. And although I did go to some like predominantly white schools, I think I had a very different experience than many. So I always like to just preface that. So I was able to like make friends with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. Every once in a while, I would meet someone that was mixed race, maybe like once or twice. But more often than not, it was for me because of my phenotype. I moved through the world like an African American because that's what people saw first. So I think from elementary school, most of my experiences were not where some people might get asked, what are you from day one, from the age 3, and whatever. I didn't really get that. It was more all of the stereotypes, you name them, that are associated with African Americans, I experienced.
Right.
So I think that kind of was a main part of my experience. But then behind the scenes, like not in the outside world, I lived a very Sri Lankan life, like a very, many times that the parent that, or the parent that's kind of setting the culture in the home is often the mother, because they're doing the cooking and the whatever and the structuring. And on top of that, my mom is an immigrant. So it was like, that's all she knew, is like, what do you mean? This is the way we do home. And so we did a lot of traveling to see family. And so I had a really strong connection behind the scenes to all of my Sri Lankanness. And so it was only over time that some of those things would collide, where an outside person, would come over. I always remember like a neighbor that she and I used to play around a lot together, but sometimes she'd come to my house. And one time she said, "Your house always smells so good. Like, I love it." And I remember being like, "My house smell? Like, what do you mean there's no smell in here?" But over time, if I go to her house, of course, I never really noticed the smell. But then I realized, I'm like, oh, that, like, we have curry so often. It's that smell that I really love. I have friends that are just like, "Oh my God, I can't stand that. How can I make sure the windows are open when I cook?" But I was like, oh, that's what she's noticing. And it stood out to her, and it never did to me. You
Right.
know, in all my family's homes, I would get that smell, but I guess I never really put 2 and 2 together. I was like,
Yeah.
"Your house doesn't smell like this? Like, what are you cooking then? I don't understand."
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
stuff like that was like, have a little moment where I'd be like, "Oh, something about this is different than your experience. Interesting."
Yeah. And it's like so interesting when as a kid you try to break it down that way, because developmentally, depending on when we hear these things or kids hear these sorts of things, they only know what they know. And so it's like, I was thinking when you said it was when you left the house, that's when
Yeah.
people, saw you as Black
Yep.
first and foremost. And for you, like I thought, oh yeah, okay, like what did you first see when you looked in the mirror? Because you have both, a balance. I know we're not going to do fractions because I did my math class with you this morning.
Yeah.
1 + 1 in our house also equals 3.
Yeah.
So, but like, what did you first see when people are like, "Oh, this is a Black girl," and you're like, "Wait a minute, like that's not all I am." So how do you answer that question for
Yeah.
yourself?
I think I think that age, I don't think there was an answer in my head. It was
Yeah,
more, I'm just me, which I think is very developmentally, like,
on
appropriate. Like
par. Yeah,
most kids when they're that age, I'm thinking like, 7, 8. It's like, what do you mean, what am I? I'm me.
yeah,
I'm a third grader. I don't know, whatever,
yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
an answer. The racial identity kind of like statements maybe aren't so common at that age. So I really just was me. I'm playing with friends. And then the outside kind of feedback made me go, oh, is this oh, and then I could look in the mirror and be like, oh, okay, this is what they're seeing, or this is what they're leading with, or this is what's
Right.
making them respond this way. So I
Mm-hmm.
think in that regard, though, because I had those experiences, it did make me start to kind of under, it forced me to understand how other people saw me, where not
Yeah.
every kid has to go through that. Some
Right.
kids can just skip through life and never really have to question why am I getting this type of treatment, or why am I having these types of interactions that
That's
seem a
right.
little, you know, discordant in some way. So I think for me that just helped me, or it gave me a perspective of like, okay, there's me, and then there's how you all see me or how you all see the world. And I kind of could have this observant kind of
Yeah.
perspective. Because then it's like, not only that, then I go to Sri Lankan family home and I can be like, oh, okay, I'm observing this difference. There's just a lot of
Yeah.
observing that I could do. Yeah.
Because like even I know from our experience, being Punjabi and Carrie's white, and so even for our kids, sometimes I think if they go to hit, their white family or
Yeah.
their Indian family, like I'm like, I'm gonna ask, I'm curious, like even when they leave, like what are they thinking? Because we're all developing that worldview at such a
Yeah.
young age, and our, earliest influences are caregivers. People are sort of helping, feel that worldview. But I often think, like, as parents, one of the best things we can do for our kids is like break it down and talk about it, because how they are as a baby versus, on all the ages and stages, that worldview changes as it has for me as a grown ass woman. Like, what I
Right.
think today was different than 5 years ago. And
Right.
so it would be interesting to kind of even, note that for my kids as well, because even though they're half Punjabi, sometimes when they go to a Punjabi home, that's very different than where the way
Yeah.
their Punjabi home operates. And so
Mhm.
I think there's confusion sometimes when you're trying to belong or think. And so sometimes the Punjabi kids don't think you're Punjabi enough, and sometimes the white
Uh-huh.
kids don't think you're white enough, right? So you're like, what? And then that's when
Yeah.
the fractions come in. So I was going to ask you though, like did you want to add anything to this before I wanted to go
I
to
mean,
your
one thing
socials
I
for a
would
sec?
say is I don't think it has to be confusing, and I would argue for a lot of young kids, it's not, because their family is family, so they know, like, okay, we go to Auntie so and so's house, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what we eat, and we go over here, we interact with grandfather that way. There's a cognitive flexibility that mixed race kids develop, and it's a skill that they can they kind of cultivate very young. But I think the confusion comes when outsiders are like, wait, why do you do it that way? And how come this? And what about that? Or when that, instead of outsider, when that kind of questioning comes from other family members or
Yeah.
comments come, then that smooth kind of transition of cognitive flexibility, like we're going to do this and we go over here, then it might get complicated because they're like, wait, but Uncle so and so said I can't really do that, or I shouldn't do that, or
Right. Yeah.
I've definitely worked with families where, let's say it's like Filipino other, and the Filipino side is like, well, I mean, you're not really Filipino though. So imagine your own family kind of
Yeah.
reminding you, yeah, you're welcome to be here, but also just FYI.
That's not,
That's
yeah, I know, right? You're like, what? Yeah.
yeah.
And you're
So
already
that,
going through your own identity, complications. We already at those ages don't feel like we belong. And then you have that. And I think what I hear you saying too is like there's the cognitive flexibility, which I love, and then there's that code switching. And I think
yeah,
there's differences, and maybe, it's like what are something as caregivers we can do to help guide our kids, in a healthy path of that collect or that flexible cognitive sort of thinking versus them feeling like I have to protect, and when I'm here, I have to talk like this, and then when I'm there, I have to talk like that. Because that's really what I don't want to, support my kids with in the home, like feeling like I have to cover it up or be this way or that way.
yeah. I mean, I think it's more about openly talking about it and maybe acknowledging, like, oh, did you notice when we go here, you know I'll give an example. Like, let's say a white American family, it might be very common to call aunts and uncles, maybe even grandparents, it depends, but maybe the grandparents have a specific name, but aunts and uncles can be called by their first name,
Right.
and it's not like disrespectful or
Yeah.
whatever. But then in this other home, let's say it's a like immigrant family or something, there might be much higher expectations of, no, it's auntie so and so, or you don't just say their first name. So it's kind of like bringing that to conversation, like, hey, what do you think about how we do this, and then over here we kind of do that.
Yeah.
It's almost like comparing and contrasting cultural norms versus making a rule of sorts that carries through both homes, or saying one is right and one is wrong. Well, they don't do that. Well, that's not right. So those
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
are what allow for the cognitive flexibility to be like, hey, that's cool that you get to have this experience, and then you go over here and you do it this way, and you know how to move back and forth within it without any problem.
Right.
um
That's
yeah.
cool. Yeah. Yeah. okay, so just your socials, like congrats, like you're doing so well on social media.
Thanks.
You have a lot of people that follow you, a lot of people that stay. And so I'm curious, like, what do you think is the main thing that's drawing so many people to your socials and the videos and the content you're creating about mixed race people?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback that I'm getting, one is that validating an experience a lot of mixed race people have. So I get lots of DMs from mixed race, you know, young to older adults that are like, I'm so happy I found this page. I feel seen, I feel validated. You're helping me on my journey. They're sort of like, I know you're trying to focus on parents, but actually it's all for me. Like, please keep making content for me,
Yeah.
So I think that's one piece, is that I am illuminating an experience in a way that is, just affirming, rather than, oh, woe is me, and oh, did you know these people have all these problems? I don't ever have those kind of pieces on my social media. And then for parents, I think most of the feedback is just, oh, you are helping me consider the things I didn't consider. And it's very illuminating, or, oh my gosh, my eyes are being opened about what I need to pay attention to, what I might need to start doing, saying, investigating, whatever. And so I think those are the top two. And then probably the other thing, which I do think is, I would say a skill that I have, is like kind of translating the tougher stuff into a digestible.
Yeah.
So taking
Yeah.
like research, and instead of making it an academic post, kind of making the point in a fun, maybe more entertaining, lighthearted way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
that's always the key. And then like our attention spans,
Yeah.
are so it's like how do you do like a 300-page article
Yeah.
yeah, in a fun cute way in 5 seconds or less. Yeah,
Right.
that's quite the challenge, but you're doing it so well. Like you're drawing people, you're pulling in all sorts of different parts of your own character. It's clear to
Yeah.
see like your personality, and I think
Yeah.
that's what brought me to your page. I mean, also shout out to Tara, who is a
Yeah.
listener, a follower, and she actually recommended you to me. She
Yeah.
reached out and she heard an episode and said you might get something out of this, and I have not
That's
left your
awesome.
page. So yeah, no, I
That's
appreciate
Yeah.
what you are doing, because I think it's a demographic that even, I worked in mental health for so many years, and you're collecting demographics, right? So
Yeah.
you have the one nationality, one culture,
Yeah.
and sometimes part of the presenting concern is the family making sense of like their blended family or their different,
Yeah.
cultural backgrounds and whatnot. And so it can get, messy. And
Yeah.
so when you're trying to help even mark down, and so I think
Yeah.
I think we've come some ways, but we have a ways to go. But people
Yeah.
like you, conversations like this sort of open those doors to
Yeah.
being curious,
Yeah.
especially I think the number of interracial like couples
Couples.
has gone up
Yeah.
and then those couples that are having kids has also gone up, so
Yes,
there's a lot
absolutely.
of them out there, right, that need
Yeah.
that
And
guidance.
what's interesting is like the research and the information and the books, like they've been out there for like 40 plus years, 50 years. But I think people don't know often that it is out there. Like I certainly didn't when I was in college.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I wouldn't have known to look for it unless I had an independent study. Then if people think about it, they don't know where to find it. And so enter social media, where it's an opportunity to kind of bridge those two
Yeah.
worlds, where to me, I think a lot of the academic research world stays very insular, and so they share their results with each other. And if you're not going to the academic conferences, you won't know what's kind of being put out. And so then the regular people that are like, hey, what did the news tell me? What does, the internet say about this thing? That's where they're doing their research. So I'm trying to sort of say, look, a lot of people have researched this stuff, and I want you to know about it. Don't just go to that one random blog by the one person
Yeah.
that's like, I feel like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. And then like there's a whole confirmation bias too. Like it is helpful to explore and expand by yeah, getting some facts, some data,
Yeah.
but also looking outside of where we would normally go to for our media,
Yeah.
fillings and stuff. So you
Yeah.
you mentioned, like conferences and stuff. So I know you've done a lot of work with organizations, you've attended conferences as you said. So for you, like what were some of the biggest insights and sort of learnings that helped shaped your experience as you fell into, came into your role in this journey of working with people with mixed races?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that there is a shared experience across millions of mixed race people, and they don't all have to have the same background. And once that kind of really stood out, that became a big interest of mine to make sure everybody else understood that. I think a lot of times I'll say in American society, there's a lot of focus on Black versus white. It could be, I mean, it's all tied to history, but it's either one or the other. But when you have someone that has both of those in their background, that just becomes a hot topic. And so every time it's talked about, as far as like mixed race, people think, oh, it means black, white.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and it's so to me, learning that, all right, there's a whole bunch of other combinations that are also mixed race, that are not just black, white, and they're all unique, but they also share this, this universal kind of experience of being mixed in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the approach I take on my page as well. It's like, it's not about one particular mix. It's about the shared experience that everyone has. And I think that's also, to your point, like why the page grows, because someone could be, they can say, oh, you know what? I'm Native American and I don't know, Filipino, and I totally identify with this. And then someone else is like, well, I'm black and white, so do I. Oh,
Yeah.
You get a
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
range. So it's like, there's something there. And why is that?
Right. It's definitely, there's a community for sure. And I appreciate that people are coming from different backgrounds and feeling like there is a place to, like, the biggest thing that stood out of the many wonderful things you said is that fact of being seen and connection. And it doesn't matter where we come from as humans. If we're humans, that is what we need.
Yeah.
And so many people don't experience that in a great way. And then it shapes us as we get older. And then again, we throw in the different racial backgrounds and the systemic stuff that comes in. And so when my husband and I decide to get together and then we decide to have kids, we may not have actually thought of all these things beforehand, because and we'll get to some of that. You're in love, you think, oh, cute, 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 and there was a time where you get caught up in all these people saying, I can't wait to see what your kids look like. Your half kids, I can't wait, right? And so you're like, yeah, I can't wait too. Fast forward, you have these kids that are growing now, and you're like, wait a minute, there's a little more to this than that. And once we start working through some of these things, we're realizing in our home, like just even the power imbalance of being with one of the races being white, and then the other one, for in our house happens to be Indian. And so do you find that there's a power imbalance, doesn't matter in any of the mixed races, or do you see some differences when the combo is with white and, the other BIPOC races, or, Asian and Asian, Black and Asian sort of thing?
Well, by power dynamic, I think it's, what do you mean by the power difference?
Okay, with the systemic issues for the what I'm particularly asking, and sorry, I'm not being clear, is there are many conversations out there about white is not a race. All the other races are the race. So when you have two mixed races, truly would be when there's no white race involved. Maybe in the way that it was in your home. And so for us, I hear, and I'm not saying I believe or not, but I hear, okay, really the power imbalance. And I feel too, when you have white in the home with marginalized community, there already are systemic stuff that my husband has to be aware of. I'm working through being aware of, but now we've done the combo and put those two together, and you have one side of my kid being white and all these sorts of things, and the other side of Indian, and there sometimes feels like there's a power imbalance because you're either feeling confident on your white side because you have access to this, but then you're feeling marginalized on the brown side because you're having to advocate for your community. So I don't know if that's, I'm sure there's a succinct way. Maybe I'll put up Chat GPT and say, how do I say this?
No, I got you. I got you.
And I struggle sometimes when I go on a long, this long haul, is because I'm trying to not, like, I never want to offend any race or anyone. I'm just curious about, okay, what we see in our home. And that's why I have you here to say, hold on, that's just you, or whatever
definitely.
comes your way.
I
So,
think to your point, if you have a mixed race kid with like a white American parent, European American parent, yeah, there a lot of the research even shows that that child struggles to kind of identify or incorporate the white part of their identity because it often feels so tied to power and privilege. So it's kind of like, okay, if I already, especially for the mixed race person that does not look white, if they walk out into the world and people sort of know that they are something else, then they don't feel, or I shouldn't say they don't feel, but it's a harder kind of journey to sort of be like, can I still be white if I'm not seen that way? If I don't get to access, the privileges that come along with that, what really happens to that aspect of my identity? And so then sometimes they may choose to just identify with the more marginalized background. But I think the flip also happens. So if the mixed race person actually is more white presenting and the world thinks they're white, then there becomes another side of like, wait, I am getting a lot of privileges and a lot of like, privileged treatment, but I have this really deep awareness that I have a marginalized
right.
aspect of the community, and now this feels wrong or uncomfortable, and I want to be able to do something about that, or maybe I want to try to assert the marginalized side so that I don't have this privilege. So the power dynamic is really about, what do I do about the privilege that comes with this white side of my family? I always add in, when it comes to identity, privilege is not is not like, it's not a part of one's identity. The parents' culture and background is what needs to be passed on. And so a lot of times white American parents are not really sure how to do that because they feel like, wait, did I have a culture? Do I have a racial identity? And when I work with them, I kind of help them see, like, you absolutely did, even if it's growing up in the Midwest, Michigan, there are certain things you ate, there's certain ways you interacted, there's certain things about, I don't know, seasons and life, that became your white American culture versus Rhode Island versus Florida versus the South versus, San Diego. So, apart from that, like, especially for the parents that are like, I don't know if I am connected to France or Germany or England or whatever, maybe it's a mixture of all of those, then I say, well, then you had a specific culture here. We all live in white American culture. That's what the US is. So we've all had to learn that to some degree. And then we can have our sub identities, that are linked to our cultural backgrounds. So helping parents connect to that is important, because then that kid can say, okay, my white parent is not just privileged. They have a whole thing, they have a whole
Right.
behind them. I'll give a quick example, because
Yeah,
I
yeah, please.
a teenage girl, and she had an Asian parent and a white parent. And much of her upbringing, she kind of didn't think a lot about her background. But to shorten the example, one thing that stood out to her is that she had family in Nebraska, and she would go, and it's like grandparents and aunts and uncle, like a lot of her family was from there. And one thing that she said, oh, I just love doing Christmas cookies. Like, oh, I'm going to go see my family and we're going to make Christmas cookies, and this is a thing. And her mother, who grew up in an Asian home with two Asian immigrant parents, would sort of be like, like, Christmas, what is that? Like, I never did Christmas cookies. I don't know. This is not
Right.
my thing. This is not my culture. And so there was a year where they did not go to that side of the family. They stayed home. And so the daughter was then leading, okay, we're going to do Christmas. Like, we're going to keep this tradition. And the mom's like, I don't know what we're doing, but okay. Like, if you want to do it, okay, cool, let's try it. But it was very meaningful for her. But she was able to realize, oh, maybe this is a quote unquote white thing to do, but specifically white American from this culture, because
Right.
every single person, I mean, it was a whole thing, a day long. I mean, they made hundreds of cookies,
Yeah, yeah.
decorated them and all that. So even when I think about it, when I'm talking with her, I'm like, I certainly did not grow up with the tradition of Christmas cookies. I've never had people give me Christmas cookies. Like, I guess wherever I live in Southern California,
Yeah,
it's
there
the
was no.
same. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like, not only was it not a thing in my home, because my mom's like, where's Christmas what? Like, we're not going to just
Yeah.
make cookies. That's not healthy, you know? So,
Yeah.
but I didn't grow up in my neighborhood. So she was able to really be like, okay, this is something that is part of my identity, part of my culture, part of this upbringing that I had, a tradition that I value that is different than my Asian background. And it's not, has nothing to do with privilege, has nothing to do with whiteness and the power behind whiteness. And I
Yeah.
think for every family, I try to help them find that piece, because
Yeah.
it needs to be found, because that is where identity comes from. Like I said, you don't pull identity from power. You don't pull,
Hmm.
and if you do, that's a problem when you're like,
Yeah,
my
that's a
whole
different
identity,
episode.
yeah, my whole identity is the power I have over people.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
we don't, that's
Right.
scary.
Right. Yeah. Please. Yeah. No, and I love that example because I think sometimes we don't realize these things as parents, like just parents in general. Our kids are going through their own journey. They're seeing things at school. And, I also was that child of immigrants. I get asked, how did you grow up in Canada, not know this? I'm like, well, my household was Indian, right? Like,
Yes,
so we didn't grow up with all that pop culture, and it's all
yeah,
good. I caught up later on in life, gave my husband and I lots of things to watch and do when we met. But also now I'm a Punjabi girl, but I'm born and raised in Canada. And so I have
yeah,
this whole North American context, Punjabi context. And
yeah,
so I have to think about those things because all these years, my parents just went along with it to make us feel part of everything. Sure, we'll celebrate Christmas. We didn't really
yeah,
do it, but we kind of
yeah,
did. And, we
yeah,
kind of did the Easter like to a degree. So we had something to go back to school and talk about on Monday. Like,
uh-huh.
yeah, we had Easter egg, but we didn't know what it meant.
Yeah,
Now the meaning is so different for my
yeah,
boys because my husband did grow up with these things. They did have meaning in his
mhm,
household. And so when I see my
yeah,
kids at Christmas or I see my kids during certain North American holidays, like I also have to, bite
yeah,
bite my tongue and also put on like a very warm and inviting approach because they're watching and they're not going to feel connected, and that's something that they love doing.
mhm,
And so, sometimes I have to also think, okay, like even though I didn't benefit from this isn't what we did. They're
yeah,
having a different life experience, and I got to be curious about where this is coming from and why. And as long as we're not, picking something that's harming people,
yeah,
sure, we'll put, the Easter bunny up or talk about
yeah,
where Easter and all that sort of stuff comes from. But I
mhm,
think I think your point, what I hear is like there has to be a level of awareness from us caregivers about our own context and,
yeah,
the demons within of our own childhood. And it doesn't matter what culture you're
yes,
from. Sometimes we grow up wanting to neglect a lot of that. We don't want
yes,
anything to do with it. Then we
yeah,
have a kid and
yeah,
the kid wants everything to do with it.
right,
And so
exactly.
what's your suggestion or advice or from your experience when us parents show up and say, my kid wants all of this and I don't want all of this? What do you say to us when we show up and say, what do we do?
Well, if the parent doesn't want it, I mean, it's a bigger discussion first to be like, why not? When that's, like you said, it's, if that's where you're from, what made you get to this point of you not wanting it? And then it's whatever the story is of,
Right.
well, I was forced to do this, or I never liked that. But if it's, what I think is a little bit more common is a parent that says, my kid wants all of this, but I didn't, maybe I didn't do it that much, and now I don't know how to give it to them. And maybe it's sort of like I want to give it to them because they're asking, but I just don't know how, and I no longer, I don't know, I didn't cook this or I don't speak that. Then my suggestion is like learning together and
Yeah.
in small, because it's a value for your child. They're going to need it as they navigate their own identity, and clearly it's going to be useful for you. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like asking the parent to go on an identity journey they maybe tried to skip. But
Right.
like you said, their kid is like, oh nope, you don't get to skip it now. Like, now
Yeah,
you
yeah,
got
yeah.
to.
We're doing this thing over
Yeah.
here, right? So I know my sister is also in a marriage and her boys are also mixed race. And so she's
Mhm.
like, I'm trying to navigate when my son, the youngest, is coming up and saying, I'm very curious about the white God in the sky. So she's like,
Yeah.
like I got to deal with my own stuff, regulate my own things, and now figure, okay, how do I tend to this with my kid? Because
Yeah.
we all been there when, adults feel uncomfortable and shut it down
Yeah.
as kids, and then we have to figure it. And nowadays kids have access in different ways than we did. So we
Yeah.
kind of have to be a little bit more attuned or aware with some of these sorts of
Yeah.
things, as we're saying, because these guys are so curious,
Yeah.
and and want to know. So if we could just stay with adolescence, because for a second, going back to stages and ages, adolescence is a brain pruning, all that fun stuff. We're growing, huge development phase, and I know from some of your work I've read, like, you've had mixed race adults reflect on the adolescent stage being
Uh-huh.
a bit challenging for them.
Yeah.
And so we're sort of talking about that, and particularly, sorry, challenging for their identity development as we're talking. Just curious, like, what are some of the common struggles you've observed during this sort of phase and stage? And then how do these, adults tend to carry into their adulthood all of the sort of these challenges and struggles from their adolescence? Any feedback, any tips, any sort of things stand out for you?
Well, the first question, adolescence is all about group membership and belonging.
Mm,
It's about identity, but it's also about getting your identity validated by the group that you are part of. So whether it's like, I'm a skater, and so that means I'm going to dress like the skaters and hang out with the skaters at lunch and whatever. Um, it's about, okay, who am I? And then is there a group for me to be who I am? And so I think that's why it's often very complicated, or the journey is complicated for mixed race teens, because there is often a very clear set of one group and another group that should be obvious that they would belong in, but sort of like, oh, but which one do I,
yeah.
choose to kind of have for my belonging? And it's that answer becomes dictated by a whole bunch of different things and has like a whole bunch of different answers. And there's a lot of exploration. So you can see a mixed race teen align themselves with one group for a while, and then maybe that doesn't like feel all the way right. So then they go to another group, and maybe they align and find belonging with a group that's like not a part of either of their backgrounds. Like
Right.
that's a common, I mean, like I said, there's just a million answers, but the biggest piece of the puzzle is finding belonging and group membership. And the more that this person is not able to do that, that's when we get all those probably more stereotypical expectations of mixed race kids, of like, oh, they feel confused, and oh, they're going through all these negative emotions. I don't think it has to be that way, but I do think if they're in an environment where all the groups are saying, nope, you can't be in this group, then they sort of feel like, well, then where do I fit in? Where do I go? Everybody keeps telling me no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think that's really what it is. And most of the time that begins to shift in college. Like that's the beauty of college, is the age of a college kid, there is enough awareness of being like, okay, I'm a little more aware of who I am. And now I feel like I want to go seek it out a little bit more hardcore. So you see a lot more students joining all the whatever South Asian Student Association and the da da da
Right.
club, and and it's meant to kind of foster that like awakening and that excitement that they have. So, to your question about like what happens into adulthood, hopefully college is a nice like course correct for a lot of folks, where they can be like, okay, I feel a little bit more comfortable being who I am. I know how to incorporate these various things. But
Mm,
sometimes it takes longer. If they don't have that experience at college, then it might be a more solo journey trying to
mm-hmm.
get to that point. But
Mm,
I think it's more the former, of like finding it, probably
right.
beginning the journey in college a little bit more.
Okay, so then the other part to this is some of these adults, or some of the adults that you've worked with, have also talked about wishing their parents were more
Yeah.
supportive or present during these sort of identity forming
Yeah.
times. What were some of the main things they felt they were missing that some of us can quickly jot down and, try to learn
Yeah.
from those growing pains?
Yeah, definitely just talking about it a lot. You would be surprised how many mixed race folks say, my parents never talked to me, or never even told me that that's what I was, or never talked about the fact that there were two different cultures in our family. So the easiest starting point is being like, as a young child, being like, so did what do you think about this? Or
Right.
let's read a book about blah, blah culture. Did you know you're both? And kind of just making sure it's overtly said. Because I think sometimes there's an expectation that the parents are like, of course they know. My kid knows, then
Yeah.
the kid's like, wait, what? I'm what? Oh, hold on. So that's the first piece of the puzzle. But then also talking about the whole belonging and group membership piece and just reminding the kid. I think a lot of adults have said, I wish my parents said it's okay to be
Mm.
a member of more than one group at the same time. There's nothing wrong with you. Just all the ways of affirming you're perfectly fine and you have permission to live your life as you want to. Like, don't try to follow the expectations of other people. Like, well, you're not this enough and you didn't do that, so that means you don't count. If they had parents that were like, you always count, and like they're stupid for saying that,
Yeah.
it would have that person often says like, I would have had the confidence to kind of move through the world a little bit differently rather
Yeah.
than shrinking myself. If okay, yeah, never mind, I won't go in your group, and I won't go over there. You know,
Right. I
yeah,
appreciate that because I'm just also having a moment too as we're shifting from, the focused parent to parents and families. I think sometimes growing up, our parents didn't have sort of the language or understanding and how to
yeah,
help us make sense when we'd come home with a school problem. This kid said this thing.
right,
And so a lot of times you're like, oh, it's fine, you're
yeah,
fine. And you parents mean well and all that, but you're right. You kind of grow up with these like unfinished businesses in your mind
yeah,
of like, what do I do? How do I do that? And something that we're trying to pay a little bit more attention is our younger son has been experiencing some racial experiences, and he really at this point is identifying more with his Indian culture.
okay,
And so I caught myself because he came home one day and it just wasn't the time to have a big
okay,
conversation, right? Like we're
yeah,
all busy, we're doing something, and I had to catch myself because I'm like, this is the time though, because he just
uh,
experienced this and he's coming home and bringing it up to me. And so I can say, we'll come back to it, we'll pause.
right,
Or can I
right,
at least validate and say, I
yeah,
hear you, I see this, I'm sorry, and it did happen, versus did it really happen that way? Kind of things were told. And then, we didn't have to rush to it right away, but we were
yeah,
able to like throughout the week come back, and because again, he's 10, he
yeah,
can't,
yeah,
it's a huge process. And so
yeah,
I think sometimes we get so caught up in day to day, or we get fearful as parents and or guilty, and then we don't know how to respond to the thing our kids need. And so
yeah,
I don't know if there's anything you can add to that, or some advice you can give to us when our kids are coming with these big systemic issues
yeah.
and we may never experience them, or we have our own demons with it. So yeah,
Yeah,
you're
I think what you said so far is like one of the best places to start is to be like, wait, stop. Okay, what? Tell me again. Like, what happened? Like, hearing it out is often like one of the bigger pieces of the puzzle. Because if a kid gets shut down from a small story, like, so and so said this to me, and the parent's like, that's nothing, you're fine. Just tell them they're stupid. And the kid's like, okay, note to self, this is not the place to bring those stories.
yeah, that too, right? Yes,
And
yes.
so then the next time it happens, they're going to go home and be like, I'm not going to bother telling my parent because last time they didn't know how to talk about it. So why would I share this bigger thing or this second time? So I think even if the parent doesn't know what to say, hearing the story and being like, wow, okay. And like, then what happened? And what did you think? And so did you feel like, were you hurt or were you mad or were you, well, I was oh, okay, okay, and just letting it be told, because the venting is a big piece of it. Then the parent can go away and be like, all right, what am I really thinking? What could I come back and say? Do I need to go online and like learn something about something? And then you can go back to the kid and be like, okay, so I was thinking a little bit about what you said the other day. You know, you
Right.
you've opened a window when you just listen and just let them tell the story. That window is open for you to come back later and be like, so let's go back to that because you said they said this about your mom, or I don't know.
Right.
And so let's do you need to learn more? Oh, they said you weren't blah 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 enough, and I was thinking about that. Maybe we should do this, or how do you feel about that? Or almost like working on a solution together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that.
um,
And I think it's a great way to build insight.
yeah,
Asking those questions helps our kids sort of stop and think, Yeah, how was I feeling in the moment?
Right.
Because we miss that often. We get so caught up in the content of the story. He said, she
Yeah.
said, they said, and less about what was
Yeah.
going on for you in the moment. Were you
Right.
drowning? Were you wanting to react?
Right.
And all those
Yeah.
reflexes that kind of kick in for us.
I mean, and I think that's really when people retell a story, especially young kids, but really anybody, and they're doing the he said, she said, it's like they're trying to get to the feelings behind it all. They're trying to process the feelings that came behind it. So sometimes when someone interrupts the retelling and just says, "Wait, so were you just pissed off?" Yeah, actually I was, then
Yeah.
they're given a chance to get to the emotional processing that they needed to do, because it's like the story didn't matter. Whatever ticked off that feeling, they need to get that out. So
Yeah.
remember that for kids too, because sometimes, I mean, especially if the kid is like, 6, it's gonna sound like a story about nothing to the adult. It's gonna be like,
Yes.
okay, so so and so took your cookie. So what,
Yeah.
But when you really say like, what did you think about it, and how, all of those things, then you can be like, oh, okay, this is a story about rejection.
Yeah.
This is a story about bullying. This is a story about whatever. And then you are like, okay, now I see what my kid is experiencing.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
I like what you're saying, and it just makes me think about, like, sometimes I think when you are two parents that came together from two races and had a kid, sometimes you're already starting in this place of lots of maybe community family rejection, as you mentioned that word. People aren't really feeling this vibe of, two
Mm.
different cultures coming together. And so
Mm.
you're already kind of up against that and having to
I see.
prove maybe
Yeah.
guilt because you've lost family members,
Yeah.
maybe guilt that you didn't, care for your culture in the way, all these sorts of
Yeah.
things.
Yep.
And then we have our kids, and I think sometimes we project that. It can, not all of us, but we can project some of that. So, if I wasn't allowed to, let's say I was disowned by my parents. I wasn't, but let's say I was, and they
Yeah.
weren't really wanting to be part of any of this. I maybe may hold on to my culture really close and really force feed that to my child or neglect it, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious for those parents, especially those new parents that can't really have that conversation with their baby in their womb or the baby that's out or their infants. But, like my story was my kids always looked way whiter. And so I would, be at the local community lake where it's a very white community.
Yeah.
And I would constantly breastfeed my son when I was at the lake so that the moms knew this was
Ah,
my baby.
right.
I'd go to the mall and I'd constantly be asked,
Yeah.
like this baby that I was nannying for. And so
Right.
then it kind of started to build my world, like sort of shift my worldview and
Yeah.
all that to where I'm at. And so I'm just going back and reliving some things that maybe I didn't realize were highlights that brought me to where I'm at when I'm raising my kids. And it's not good or
Yeah.
bad. It's just these are experiences.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, when you have you worked, I'm sure you have worked with young parents or parents that have young children that are mixed race that aren't really, the parents are really just figuring it out, like that
Yeah.
6-year-old. Like, what's some feedback, some tips or things that we can help those parents with that are new, that are, I have this mixed kid, I'm a white dad holding a kid that looks completely brown, or I'm a brown mom that's holding a kid that looks
Yeah.
Asian. That sort of mentality, like what's the thing to, the,
Yeah.
the script in our head that we can sort of work through or remind ourselves, because I feel like that can get really overwhelming.
Yeah, it does. And I think those are really common examples that almost every parent of a mixed race kid, or maybe I should say, especially if they have more than one, they're going to have that experience with one of the kids.
Right.
And every mixed race kid often has a story about, they used to always say this to my dad or my mom or blah, blah, blah. So it is such a universal experience, the outside kind of questioning and assumptions. So to me, the script kind of in your mind has to start with, our family is normal, you just don't understand, like you're being intrusive, you're being ignorant, and now I can approach my answers, my perception, my experiences through that lens, versus what I think what you're saying is what a lot of parents do is they don't have that barrier up, so then it just hits them personally
Yeah.
and they're like, what, you're saying I don't, this, or why do you think that, and why'd you say that about my kid? instead of being like, wow, you sound like, in their mind, you sound really dumb because, like, why would I, just the sort of things that a lot of parents say, like, why would I be walking through the grocery store on a Tuesday at 3 o'clock with a child that's not my own? Like, because a lot of parents get asked, like, is that your kid? Did you kidnap a child? Like, it's more fathers that get that question than mothers. But if you, instead of taking it personal, really listen to the question and be like, how stupid do you sound to come up to a stranger who's clearly with a child and then accuse them of not, owning that child, being a parent of that child.
Right.
So to me, the script is that this is a marginalized group, right? Having a mixed race kid, it is a marginalized population. So the first step of that script is the parent knowing that, and then staying aware that if it's marginalized, that means the majority of people don't know about it, because we don't make space, we don't make it visible. So it's almost not surprising that people would be like, wait, how did that happen? You exist? It's kind of like people going up to someone with a disability and being like, oh, what happened to your leg? Oh, can I try your wheelchair? Just like stupid stuff. Like, this is my life. What are you talking about?
Right. Yeah.
So I think when a parent can separate that and really, in the work that I do and like in the trainings and the courses that I have, I really help parents understand mono-racism. It's a term out of academics, but it really is. It's another ism. There's racism, there's sexism. This is the ism that is directed at mixed race people, because everybody works under a system that says you should fit in one racial group. Like, that's what we believe. And if you don't, something's wrong with you. Something is, you're less than, it's not right, it's not normal. And so therefore, because it's not normal, I get to ask you about it. I get to be like, why are you existing? How are you doing that?
Yeah.
So helping parents really digest and understand that principle, it makes them walking out into the world go, oh, right. Okay. Because you all think every single person has to fit into this nice, clean, neat little racial group, and my kid doesn't. So of course you're going to have questions. Of course you're going to make some ignorant statements and feel like you can, interrogate me about how my child came to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it gives them a stance of like a little bit more empowering once they can understand that.
Right. Oh, I appreciate that. I also appreciate, like, times are changing from, even 13 years ago when we had our first kid, and there wasn't these kind of communities and supports that I was aware of.
Right.
But today it's like easier access because there are more, I can go to my socials and I can find you. I can find, more people that maybe look like my kids, or more people like my husband and I that are maybe experiencing similar raising children issues, which I think, in general, all of us parents share, but we all have different complexities. Like, how would you guide parents in understanding what identity struggles might be expected, when you are raising a mixed race child? What are some things that we can sort of keep in our mind, think about as our kids are going through their identity evolution?
Yeah, I think the things to keep in mind is that the child is going to try on different identities. It's never a one and done thing. It's never a one and done thing with any of us, whether we're monoracial or mixed race. But especially for mixed race folks, it's going to be more obvious or visible because it feels like a contrast where there's sort of, oh, you're Filipino today, and oh, next week you're, Mexican or whatever their background is. So I think helping parents understand and create space for the trying on of a lot of different identities, and that it's going to evolve over the years. I always there's an activity I used to do with the parents that are in some of my courses. Sorry for the siren. I hope you can.
I don't even hear.
Okay. But young kids, they often do that first day of school picture, and it's like, I'm in third, I'm first grade, I want to be this. So adding to that and sort of asking in your own conversation, like, how would you identify? What would you say you are? doing that year over year, a parent can really see, oh, identity does change. And the way my child understands themselves changes within 1 year, even though parents have stayed the same, life has stayed the same. But the kid, you can watch that evolution of like, oh, now I'm going to say, I'm going to describe myself differently, um, maybe they'll say I'm one thing over another. Maybe they'll list both. Maybe they'll list this whole new thing, but all of that would be normal, and to be expected.
I love that drawing. It's like the height tracker, but the identity tracker. It'd be
Yeah.
so cool. Yeah, because I remember my kids when they first were drawing, it was like dark brown coloring of their face. And
Yeah.
then over, I remember like they did it again in grade 2 or something, and it was lighter. And so I wonder now, how they would. And like as you're talking about all this, I also hear a lot of that, again, that cognitive flexibility you talked about in the beginning. I hear a lot of that is needed for us parents too, because we've talked a little bit about challenges, struggles, parents, we have worldviews. Some of us connect more with only our culture and that's it. And not all kids that are mixed race grow up with both or all the
Yeah.
cultures that brought them to the world.
Exactly.
So so there's all these sort of like you're talking about differences, and again on a kid's development trajectory, they're already going to want to belong to goth or belong to heavy metal, belong to rap music, all these different kinds of areas. Throw in the mixed race, there's other components there, and out of all of that, what I hear is being present and being open to learning about why
Yeah.
it is your kid is feeling that way, why today they're identifying with, the Indian music,
Yeah.
why tomorrow they're more interested in the North American views. It's
Yeah.
just part of their development. One doesn't mean one is better. Because I think there's like guilt, right? Around,
Yeah.
and now I'm let down because you don't want to be part of your own
Right.
culture. But we don't own our kids. And I think we forget that when we have them. We think we own them, but we
But also,
really don't.
they might say that now, and then in a year they may not say it. So there may
Totally.
be a time when they're like, I don't identify with you. I don't want to be Punjabi. You might be like, ugh.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
a year or two down the road, they're like super extra, more
Yeah.
Punjabi than ever. I mean,
Totally.
that's the journey. And
Yeah.
like you said, just it's a parent really being able to make space and like tolerate the, oh, okay, is that what we're thinking now?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we have some conversations about it, but still, I'm gonna let you do this thing that you're
Yeah.
clearly trying out. But as long as I keep what I need to provide for you consistent, at some point we know things will merge together into some way that you're gonna know that you're you.
Totally. Yeah.
I always tell parents, like, there was a time when, especially the first time we went to Sri Lanka, my mom was like, okay, we're going to go to Sri Lanka. I'm like, that's dumb. Like, I don't want to go. I'm not that, I'd just be like, I want to stay, like, hang out with my friends in the summer. But to her credit, when we came back, she's like, oh, after that, you were just like die hard, because I think I went and I was like, oh, it's not just my family. Like, it's a whole island and a country of people that like do certain things a certain way. And then I was able to be like, oh, and I'm connected to it. Oh,
Yeah.
so I think the protest and what looks like rejection, it really isn't. It's just, it has to be up to the parents to be like, you're rejecting now.
Yeah.
I got to keep giving you all that I can from all the cultures as much as I can,
Totally.
so
Yeah.
that, so that you can bring it together later when you need to.
Right. And I appreciate that. My oldest, he's been listening, watching to obviously my interactions. These kids are sponges, they observe. And
Yeah.
he recently has been talking about, he's 13, so he's just started talking about what his type would be if and when he's ready to date.
Uh-huh.
And so this is just like fascinating. And so, his first thing to me is, I like blonde girls. And I was like, okay,
Mm.
cool, cool, cool. And he's like, are you going to be mad at me for saying that? And
Uh,
it's kind of actually the catalyst to this conversation, because it
uh,
really it hasn't left, because
yeah.
it means he's paying attention to how I'm talking, particularly about white people, my experiences, and also my white girl complex I always talk about on the podcast too, that I grew up with. I wanted to be a white girl. And so there's all of that. And
Right.
the other part is he's testing, right? Like he's figuring out
Yeah.
where is my mom's, acceptance, comfort? Where is that? How far can I take it
Yeah.
before I tell her I am dating one or
Yeah.
whatnot? And so, at the end of the day, like most parents, it's just hopefully whoever you bring home, whenever you do, they're going to be kind, respectful people. Like
Yeah.
that's all we care about at the end of the day. But it was a really good reminder for me to just keep my own stuff in check because he's in that phase where the good stuff of development happens, and we don't realize day to day when we're doing the things we're doing. And so I appreciate your
Yeah.
conversation about, okay, you guys, we all have to open the door, be flexible, as well as being okay with asking and helping our kids build insight about where that comes from.
Right.
Because we
Right.
don't want to raise little isms either, right? So
Yeah.
we want to be aware of all those isms that come in our
Yeah.
way. So okay, so I know you have to go at this point. Is there anything that you wish I had asked you or that you want to cover based on your experience, expertise that you think other, families listening would benefit from?
You know, we could have a multi-hour discussion and
We
still
should.
kind of, yeah, we'll still never cover it all. So, I mean, I think it's a great starting point. Some of the topics that we did cover. So, I really wouldn't say that there's anything we missed. I think there's really good principles that we got to cover. That'll be great takeaways for parents.
Perfect.
Yeah,
And I think, as we always tell people listening, like these conversations are door openers, and so it
yeah,
is the first that we're bringing on the podcast. And so after people listen, I'm sure there's going to be some reflections. I always
yeah,
appreciate when people share that with us. And so I'll reach out to you as well because there probably will be more follow-ups, and maybe we can come back again together and do a little post, part two to this as
okay,
well, like responses and sort of scripts, how we could have these kind of conversations. You did a nice job offering some of that, scripting and feedback as well. But like
yeah,
you said, there's so many more things we can talk about. So
yeah.
then maybe you can leave us with a call to action. If there's one thing and only one thing people listening today will leave with, what do you hope that is?
Um, that this is a unique experience. The mixed race experience is a unique experience that really should be recognized, validated, understood, and affirmed. That's what I would say. And I think so many people tend to dismiss it and, oh yeah, they're this and that, but I mean, anyway, they're just da da da. But I would want people to leave with like, wow, okay, this is a whole group of people that have particular experience. Have I even ever thought about this before? You know, have I ever made space in my own mind for this before?
That's a
Yeah.
great one. I'll start there when I journal today. Thank you again, Dr. Jenn. If people want to follow you on your socials, where can they find you? And if you have any other cool things coming out, let us know before you leave here.
Yeah, well, where they can find me is mostly on Instagram. That's where I spend most of the time. So that's Dr. Jenn Psych, which is DrJennPsych. So it's Dr. Jenn with two N's. And then the other place, I mean, I am Dr. Jenn Psych on TikTok and Facebook. I think also on Twitter or X or whatever, but I hardly use X,
I hear
especially
you.
these days. I know. But my website is freetobecollective.com. And that's where folks can find everything else that I have, which is like some freebies. I have a great book list for parents raising mixed race kids. So they can kind of find out some children's books that actually reflects a mixed race experience in the book. And then, even to what we're talking about, scripts for how to answer when people say stuff to you, especially the holidays are coming and sometimes extended family says some ignorant stuff. So I have like a 4-hour course that kind of gives
Yeah.
parents an actual script on like, okay, if they say this, here's how you can answer, like 4 different ways you can answer in any situation. But yeah, and then I have the membership, the membership community for parents raising mixed race kids who just they want to talk about this more. They're listening to you and they're like, wait, I have more questions. I want to meet other parents. I want to talk about this. So they can find that at
Oh, I love it.
freetobecollective.com as well.
I love it. And I don't want to forget, but on
Yeah.
your socials, you do talk about the elections in particular. Kamala Harris and sort of what she's going through as a mixed race woman. And
Yeah.
I think, you share a lot of good insight. I had some questions for that too, but maybe, you know, after the election, we'll come back and we'll have more conversations about that, because these things, whether she's being elected or not, these things are coming up and people are negatively, I think, recognizing what mixed race could or could not mean.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you're doing that, though. Thank you for that, because, you know, you're, I think it's helping, I know me as a parent being like, you're enough. You don't have to be one or the other, and you don't have to convince anyone that you are one or the other.
Right.
So,
Right.
thank you. Thank you for your time, your insights. You know, I'll catch you back on your socials and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Yeah, same to you. Thank you so much. This was so fun.